Monday. Good to have you here. Wow, big Menendez news. I didn't expect to hear this today, and I've got some big guests I did not expect to have today. So we're rolling with it. The DA in the Menendez case has dropped another shoe, and I don't know how many more feet everybody's got in this. Last time the shoe dropped, it was we're not supporting this habeas corpus pathway to freedom. And pathway number 2, as of today, not supporting that either, the resentencing pathway. And I think you'll remember there's only one left, right? And that's the governor and clemency, which actually is not looking too bad. But tonight, I've got the DA on this program. He is going to tell me about the reasons, which as I read through the entire case, I kept flipping back and forth between I get it, I don't get it, I get it, I don't get it. I get it, but I still got questions. And so I'm so glad that Nathan Hawkman's going to be my guest in just a minute, because there are 16 things that the Menendez brothers can do that could change his mind. I'm going to talk about those things in a moment. Also, did you hear about this 20-year-old young woman, a student at University of Pennsylvania, or Pittsburgh, and she's gone down like every kid. I got 2 kids on spring break right now. Like every kid goes on this paradise vacation for spring break with friends. Natalie Holloway did it. Only this trip was to Dominican Republic. And innocent, fun night out on the beach ended up not so innocent all of a sudden. We really don't know what's happened, but we know she is not with us right now. We cannot find her. It's been 5 days, and they are searching the beach, and they have got dogs out there, and they are questioning one young man, the last young man who went off on the beach with her. He's got a story, actually 2, actually 3, but he's not a suspect. And before you jump to the Natalie Holloway, there are some real similarities, but there are some real differences too. I'm going to lay out the whole case for you. And then I've got not only the sheriff from the town where she lives, who's involved in this, but also one of the spring breakers, who's got a few things to say about not only what the conditions were like down there, but also what the water and the beach were like the day that she disappeared. She's got the video to prove it. That's coming. Also, Wendy Williams. Big news today. Not the news I thought we'd get, which was she's getting the retesting done. We've been waiting on that. There's some reporting that's happening. But she went in an ambulance from her assisted living facility to the hospital. And the reporting is there are 2 different government agencies now investigating where she's staying and why. Why she's under the conservatorship, the condition that she's under, the restrictions she's facing. Are we now on the verge of seeing real movement in Wendy Williams' case? You know, I spoke with her for an hour. And on the heels of that, this is happening. I'm going to show you the video not far from now of this morning ambulance visit in the NYPD and the paparazzi everywhere. It's like, it was just a little jarring. All of that is coming ahead. So very full show. But 10 days from today, Lyle and Eric Menendez are scheduled to go before a judge in hopes of being resentenced for killing their parents in 1989. That long-awaited and twice rescheduled hearing is happening, or so we think. And if you're Lyle and Eric Menendez, the good news stops right there. Because the LA District Attorney, who came out a week ago against the brothers' bid for a new trial, says he's now against a resentencing, too. Nathan Hawkman is asking the court to tear it up, just tear up that the motion that was filed last fall by my predecessor, backing the brothers and this pathway to freedom. Because the DA today says that those brothers still lack, in his words, quote, acceptance of responsibility for their murderous actions. Nathan Hawkman says over the course of the investigation and the trial, Lyle and Eric Menendez lied about 20 different things, but then only ever came clean on about 4 of them. So the acknowledged lies, those 4 ones, he says, are telling 911 that they had just discovered their parents' bodies. They admitted that wasn't true. Initially insisting that they had nothing to do with the murders. They admitted that wasn't true. Suggesting that the mafia might be to blame. They admitted that wasn't true. And claiming that their father's lover warned Eric that he was in danger. They admitted that that wasn't true. But there were 16 lies that the DA is talking about. And so there are 16 allegedly unacknowledged lies. And that includes our motive was self-defense. Our father supposedly drugged and raped our friend, a girlfriend of ours. We didn't plan an alibi ahead of time. And Eric's therapist blackmailed us into confessing. And it goes on and on from there. Those are the lies that the DA says, you have never acknowledged these. You have never taken them back and said they're not true. And this is where it gets interesting. The DA says if the brothers, quote, unequivocally and sincerely and fully accept the complete responsibility for all their criminal actions, he will reconsider resentencing. But what exactly would that entail? Like what form? If they want to make these admissions, even if they would make them, like how do they do it? Do they call, write, And how much reconsidering is DA Hawkman actually prepared to do? Boy, I sure wish I could ask DA Hawkman, and guess what? I can. The Los Angeles County District Attorney is back on the program with me tonight. Nathan Hawkman, good to see you. Thank you. I really appreciate you joining me on these nights when the news is breaking, because we all have questions. I can't go over all 16 of these so-called lies, but I can tell you that their attorney says they have acknowledged them. They acknowledged them in cross-examination. They acknowledged them in the trials that they went through. They've acknowledged them in, video series, the Netflix series. They've acknowledged them in phone calls. Is there a kind of acknowledgement you're specifically looking for?
They actually have it, and that's the key. And by the way, just to be clear about the process, there are two different ways to get through to resentencing. The court filed its own motion, and the DA filed a second motion. We said that we're prepared to go forward on the court's motion, but we made the point that we'd like to withdraw the DA's motion because it contained no analysis on whether or not the Menendezes truly have completely accepted responsibility for all their actions and exhibited insights into those actions. And here's what I mean by that. Their main defense at trial was not sexual abuse. I actually read passages from their own testimony that said specifically, well, did you kill your parents because you were sexually abused? The answer was no. Their defense all along has been self-defense. They thought that their mom and their dad were going to kill them the night of August 20th, 1989, so they had to preemptively kill them first. And what we pointed out through an 87-page document that we filed today is that story is a fabrication. We pointed out the fact that they had engaged in premeditated and deliberate acts, everything from purchasing shotguns 2 days before by driving all the way to San Diego, 120 miles from LA, using fake IDs and a fake address to purchase the shotguns. We pointed out that their alibi, they actually pre-planned the alibi hours before shooting. They were going to go to Batman the movie and meet a friend afterwards. That even during the shooting itself, we pointed out that they staged the shooting to look like a mafia hit by shooting the dad through the back of the head. When the mom was shot and bleeding on the ground, they shot her in a point-blank range and on her face after reloading their shotguns. And then they shot each of them in the kneecaps after the killing. Thereafter, they carefully picked up all the shotgun shells from the dead because they were worried that they had their fingerprints on them, and disposed of the shotgun shells and the ammunition and the remaining ammunition and the bloody clothing of the shotguns by dumping it in a dumpster or throwing it over a hill. Then they dialed 911, and they screamed and cried that someone killed our parents. And when the police came out, Eric screamed at the police and said, I'm going to kill that murderer. I'm going to torture that person. Who would do such a thing? Now, if the tapes had not come out from their psychiatrist, they persisted in that lie that they didn't do it for over 6 months, that it was the mafia that actually did it. But when that lie was revealed, they admitted that lie, but then came up with this self-defense story, a story that they did not tell their psychiatrist. When the psychiatrist was hired to help them build their defense for the trial, they didn't tell anyone. In fact, what they did is they enlisted the help of 3 of their friends to come up with a story that the dad had violently raped one of Lyle's girlfriends, but she refused to say that story. They actually wrote a letter. Lyle wrote a letter to another girlfriend saying that I want you to testify that mom tried to poison the whole family. That woman actually did in the first trial, but the letter came out and she didn't testify in the second trial. And they even had another letter that Lyle wrote to one of Eric's friends that says, we want you to say that we got a handgun from you the day before the murders to prove that we wanted to act in self-defense. And that letter came out, and that person also testified that that was complete a fantasy, that he had never had that discussion with Lyle and never produced the day before.
You're so good at this. I said I couldn't possibly put the 16 lies out because it would take up the whole 5-minute segment, but you summarized a lot of it right there.
Yeah.
And the family says you're using the judgment from 30 years ago of young men, barely men, who, in their belief, were sexually abused by their father, never protected by their mother, and of course, at the moment where they're being caught, they're making up lots and lots of lies. They say that the men, now men, the boys now men, have more than atoned for that and come to Jesus on that. I get what you're saying. For people who aren't super steeped in the law, and I'll make it super succinct here, the defense that went to trial was, there's imminent danger. I must protect myself now. I must shoot. And what the state said was, no, Mom and Dad were in the den eating ice cream, watching TV. That's not imminent danger, if I have the argument correct. But their argument at the first trial was it was imperfect self-defense, not the classic self-defense, imminent danger. It was imperfect self-defense. They perceived that they were in danger, even if it was unreasonable to perceive that. But they weren't allowed to argue that at second trial. So is the DA's office at least to acknowledge, or at least able to acknowledge, that there is that unique difference between self-defense, I'm in imminent danger, I must shoot, and imperfect self-defense, I'm really kind of out of my head and I think I'm in danger? Because that's the crux here, isn't it?
Actually not. They argued self-defense in both trials in order to show that it wasn't premeditated, willful, and deliberate, which is the standard for first-degree murder. Whether it was imperfect, which means they had an actual fear that turned out not to be real, or a real actual fear. Either way, they didn't have that fear. They never told the psychiatrist, they never told anyone for years that the reason they shot their parents was because they had an actual fear that the parents were going to shoot them that night. In fact, what they did tell the psychiatrist is that their dad was a dominating person, someone that they wanted to get rid of and thought about it for a week ahead of time. They said with respect to Mom that they didn't want Mom to be a witness. That was their first response. And they thought Mom was living such a miserable life, that Dad had an affair on her, that they didn't want her to continue living that miserable life. And then they said it was basically a mercy killing. At no point do they bring up self-defense. They don't even bring up the sexual abuse, which is a different discussion. But here's my point to you.
That part I get, though. I always come in at that point and I say, it was the 80s. Men and even women rarely would talk about it. So we can all understand that there was a different way of thinking back then, right?
The point that I was making was on the self-defense argument. That's what they made up. They also suborned perjury and attempted to suborn perjury from all these friends. They've never owned up to that in 30 plus years. In fact, recently, Eric was interviewed in the Netflix special, and he says in 2024 that they basically killed their parents for self-defense. So to the extent that Mr. Garagos or the family members don't like the facts and the law as it pertains to a resentencing hearing, or don't like it for a habeas, Ashleigh, you're absolutely right. They can go to the governor, go to his home, his residence, his workplace tomorrow, and say to the governor, use your unilateral constitutional power. It doesn't have all these tests, legal tests of resentencing or habeas, and commute our sentence tomorrow and release us tomorrow. The governor has that.
So that's a possibility. Yeah. Can I ask you this? Look, the families listening tonight, they're going to, listen to everything you have to say. I'm super curious, Mr. Hawkman, if the brothers were to listen to your 16-point, summary in your release today and say, okay, we will give you what you want. How do you want it? Would you like it in an email? Would you like it in a phone call? Would you like it in a statement? And would it make a difference, Nathan Hawkman? Would you actually consider in the near future a resentencing, or would this take years? I mean, what would it take, I guess, is the question, to satisfy your requests today?
So what I made very clear is I offered the Menendez as a pathway. That pathway to show the court, as much as they're going to show the DA's office, that they've exhibited true insights into their conduct. The analogy I drew was to the case of Sirhan Sirhan, the assassin of Robert F. Kennedy in 1968, who the governor actually had in front of him in 2022 when the parole board for the first time in 40 years recommended parole. Sirhan was 77 years old at that time, 24 when he committed the crime. He basically had the lowest risk score you can have in the system. He had successfully engaged in rehabilitation in prison over those 54 years, yet the governor denied him parole, even though he had a lot of pro-parole factors, saying that Sirhan did not exhibit the full insight to his crimes. He didn't completely accept responsibility for his crimes and therefore constituted an unreasonable risk of danger to society. I've drawn that analogy and said, look, if the Menendez brothers finally come clean after 30 years and acknowledge all the stuff that they made up about their self-defense, their perjury, and their suborning perjury of others, and they do it sincerely, and they do it unequivocally. I don't care how they do it, in what form they do it. The ultimate messenger that will receive that is the court, because the court makes that final determination. What I said is that the district attorney's office will also certainly consider any new insights that the Menendezes want to offer in deciding how best to go forward with resentencing.
Last quick question. I only have 10 seconds. If they do that, say this week, and it arrives on your desk, will that hearing happen on the 20th, the resentencing hearing? And will you stand up and say, we're in support of these young men, or is that far too soon? And are you prepared to go that far and do what your predecessor did, and that is support their bid for resentencing? Or will you fight it in that hearing?
So we will certainly assess if the Menendez come forward tomorrow for the first time in 30 years and basically acknowledge all the lies that they have told, whether or not that's sincere, whether or not that's unequivocal. But like I said, putting aside what the DA's office thinks, they're going to have to convince a court that they have truly exercised this complete acceptance of responsibility, and it's not just some made-up words to please the court. If the court determines that they've actually exhibited this true insight into their actions, then yes, they can qualify and constitute being rehabilitated. They no longer would pose an unreasonable risk of danger to society, and the court can go forward with that resentencing.
Will you fight it?
Again, if we determine that it truly is sincere and unequivocal, I've already said in writing that we will certainly consider if it meets that standard, and if it does, they will then have met the standards for resentencing.
And I've only got 5 more seconds, and that is, are we going to see this hearing on the 20th?
That's up to the court. I don't know what type of hearing the court's going to have on the 20th.
Nathan Hawkman, again, I can't thank you enough on a busy day that you would stop by and talk with us about it. I look forward to our next conversation. It's intriguing stuff, and certainly for the law books. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Take care.
You too, and we will see you soon again, I hope. So how do you think Lyle and Eric feel about this latest twist in their case? If their family's reaction is any indication, they are not happy. After the break, I'm going to be joined once again by the cousins who have helped lead the charge for the brothers' release. What does Team Menendez do now? They are live right after this.
But first you need a place to look for a place to call home. And that's homes.com, because it's the best.
I told you, you cannot legally say homes.com is the best.
What if she says it as Morgan Freeman?
I can get this. Home.com.
No.
Well, how can we not say it if that's our new name?
I give up.
Homes.com is the best.com.
If there was still any doubt where the District Attorney of Los Angeles stood on the question of Lyle and Eric Menendez getting out of prison, tonight there's a whole lot less of that doubt. DA Nathan Hawkman just announced his opposition today to one of the pathways to freedom for those 2 men, a resentencing, which is a process that would make them eligible for parole almost immediately. The DA basically said the brothers have told too many lies and not enough admissions over the years about what they did before, during, and after their parents' murders. But the DA did leave the door open, a little teeny tiny crack, by suggesting that if Eric and Lyle come clean on 16 specific quote-unquote lies he says they told, then his office might consider that resentencing bid once again. Family members of Eric and Lyle, who are also family members of Kitty and Jose Menendez, the victims, they were quick to criticize the DA for the position that he's taking. And I'm pleased to welcome Lyle and Eric's cousins, Tamara Goodall and Anna Maria Baralt. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm sorry this is such a tough day for you. Like these tsunamis of news have to be really hard for you to process. Anna Maria, let me start with you. The accusation is that the DA says Eric and Lyle have told 20 lies and only accounted for 4 of them, which leaves 16 lies uncorrected. And if only they would cop to these lies about the situation around that crime, then he would reconsider the resentencing. Tell me where you stand on that, and if that's a path forward or a non-starter.
Ashleigh, first of all, thank you for having us on today. I really appreciate you allowing our voices to be heard alongside of his. And the very first thing I want to do is correct an urban legend that he keeps repeating, which is that Lyle and Eric kneecapped Jose and Kitty. That did not happen. That is not the case. If you look at the crime scene photos, you'll see a wound on Jose's thigh. Both kneecaps are intact. So I'm not sure where he got that from, why he keeps repeating it. But just first off, that is not true. So the second thing I want to say is that it was made very clear to us when we met with the past administration's resentencing team that resentencing was about rehabilitation and life post-conviction. So this constant replaying of the original crime and this laundry list of quote unquote lies that were addressed during cross-examination, I'm not sure why he thinks this is relevant. I really don't. That is not how it was explained to us. Those are questions, remorse, accountability, those are questions for the parole board. They are not for this. This is about rehabilitation and where the victim's family stands.
So I always think about the technical legalities of, these 3 pathways are all different. And they're still all in play, even though 2 of them are not looking as good. And that second one, which, was sort of dashed last week or the week before, was the habeas corpus petition for a brand new trial. That would be based on the original trial, the original defense, and the maintenance of the fact that they said it was self-defense. The DA says it wasn't self-defense because you've got to be in imminent danger. So is it necessary for Lyle and Eric to technically maintain that defense until that habeas thing is out and gone? In order to keep that second path alive, meaning they can't. They couldn't possibly do, even if they wanted to, they couldn't possibly admit to these 16 things because it will dash pathway number 2. Does that sound, I'm not sure if I'm being as good as I should be, but take a stab at that if you would, Tamara, and tell me if that's something that hamstrings the boys' attempts to even come into, satisfaction with the DA on the 16 requirements.
First of all, thank you. As Anna Maria said, I really appreciate you giving us a voice. I'm really filled with emotion today, especially after Hawkman's earlier press conference. So with all of that said, I'm just so disheartened by all of the same regurgitation of all of the same points from 1989 through 1996. There is nothing new that he has said. And truly what this is evident of, at least in my mind, is that he is so focused on the past and he has not demonstrated any understanding of what their activities and their work has been since they have been incarcerated. As far as the habeas is concerned, we did not know of the letter until well after the conviction, and Roy Rossello wasn't about to come out and say anything in 1996. He was not in a place to do that. So we have those 2 pieces of evidence now, which allows, in what has been explained to me, now I'm not a lawyer of any sort, but has been explained to me that this is applicable. Both pieces are applicable. And when Andy wrote that letter or Andy received that letter, come on, you're 13, you're putting it away. And like Anna Maria has said previously, you're picking up the phone at that point. You're not, do you think at 13 you really understand, especially in 1989, what the implications of that, something of that magnitude is going to be. So, with that, I'm really disheartened at a lack of understanding and the fact that Hawkman feels this need to keep comparing this case to Sirhan. They are just different. They are on different levels altogether. So, enough with that. Truly, it's Eric and Lyle have their own case, and it has nothing to do. It's not comparing apples to apples.
It's definitely different, that's for sure. Sirhan did not even know the man that he was shooting, and he attempted to kill 5 other people, and they were unknown to him as well. I would be concerned about releasing someone who was that, unconnected to his victims. There seems to be a real connection, clearly, between Lyle and Eric and Jose and Kitty, obviously. Let me ask you this, Anna Maria. Uncle Milton, that's Kitty's brother, died recently, which was the last holdout to supporting the release. So now there is not one family member who is alive who supports keeping Lyle and Eric in prison, which is huge, right? It is very unusual to have victims' family members all in support of releasing the killers. It's almost unheard of. Do you feel as though that has fallen on deaf ears? And I ask that mostly because I see just recently, I think even just today, you have filed a complaint with the Attorney General about the DA and said this is a Marcy's Law violation. The news conference today, we weren't informed of it as victims, and we have the right to be informed. We feel we've been, I think you said he's been hostile, Nathan Hawkman, and patronizing and aggressive. Where does this go from here? Are you finished having conversations with the DA as the victims' family members? Because he's technically your lawyers, right? And our lawyers too. Is that done? Is that chasm unclosable?
Well, apparently, since he did not notify us ahead of time before he went and did this press conference, that is a violation of Marcy's Law. From what I understand, it was actually Tamara, who's with me today, who was the name on the complaint about the meeting that we had. As far as Milton is concerned, he was the last family member who was going to be actively fighting against the release of Lyle and Eric. And I think that should say something. It begs the question of whom exactly is District Attorney Hawkman serving? Listen, the streets of Los Angeles are not safer tonight because Lyle and Eric Menendez are behind bars. That is a ridiculous thing to say. So for him to stand up and say that they're too dangerous because they haven't copped to lies that they told when they were very young and terrified about the consequences of their actions, which they have apologized up and down, left and right to everybody for, who is he serving? They're not a danger. The victim's family, that's us. We're here today talking to you about how we want them out. He's not serving us. I don't understand. It is only his personal self-interest that he is serving right now, and that has been made clear.
Okay, well, we are not finished our conversation. Obviously, there's still one more pathway, and who knows what'll happen even if this March 20th hearing happens, because it's the court. It's not the DA that decides this. So, Tamara Goodell and Anna Maria Peralt, thank you so much for tonight. I hope you'll come back when the next, development happens. And by my watch, that's like a week and a half. So until then, fingers crossed for you and your family and the peace that you all deserve.
Thank you, Ashleigh.
Do appreciate it. And still to come tonight, and we're going to continue covering that story, mark my words. But this next one, every college kid's dream, right, is spring break in a Caribbean paradise. But tonight, that is one family's nightmare, as days of searching for a University of Pittsburgh student in the Dominican Republic turns up nothing. We'll talk to a young woman who was there on the day that student vanished and has the video to prove what the conditions on the beach were actually like. But up next, the sheriff from the student's hometown on whether police on the ground in that so-called paradise are playing nice.
Or call 800-508-6010 today. New external catheters for women and men available for home use. Call 800-508-6010 today.
1 week ago today, Sadiqa Kananki arrived in the Dominican Republic for the kind of trick that you take when you're very young and the kind of trip that you remember for the rest of your life. Sadiqa is a 20-year-old pre-med student at the University of Pittsburgh, and last week was spring break, but this was no vacation in paradise. No one has seen her since 4:15 a.m. on Thursday, after she and 5 girlfriends were seen entering the beach with 2 men at the Rio Republica Resort earlier. The same group had been drinking in the hotel lobby, and just before 6 a.m., 6 of the young people left the beach, but Sadiqa and one of the men stayed behind. And then, hours later, just before 10 a.m., the man who was with Sadiqa also left the beach, but Sadiqa didn't. And her friends reported her missing that afternoon. Adding to the mystery and to the grim similarities with the Natalie Holloway case in Aruba, Sadiqa's beach buddy reportedly told multiple versions of what happened out there on the beach that night. First, CNN says that police told them he said they went into the water for a swim, he got out feeling sick and fell asleep on a lounge chair. Police said he also said a wave may have swept Sadiqa away, or that maybe she was gone and left while he was passed out on the chair. Police also said he remembered seeing her wading in the knee-high surf towards her clothes, but they say for now he is not a suspect. It's been 4 days, though, and so far all that's turned up has been Sadiqa's sarong on a lounge chair. Joined now by Sheriff Mike Chapman from Loudoun County in Virginia, where Sadiqa's family lives. Sheriff, thank you so much for being with me. Is there any update that you have on this case?
We're just working very closely with our authorities down there. We're, certainly engaged with our counterparts, not only from Dominican Republic, but at the U.S. Embassy down there, FBI, HSI, DEA. We want to make sure that we're getting all the information that we can, working very closely with the Dominican authorities here. I know they've done an exhaustive search here. We're still working through the witnesses here. I don't have any direct communication with the witnesses myself or any firsthand knowledge other than what we're hearing from the investigative standpoint and what's going on with these. And there is some concern, obviously, with some of the inconsistencies in the stories, and it is starting to really bother. Right.
That's what I want to get to. Sometimes there's a language barrier. I'm not sure how helpful those authorities have been, so I'm going to ask you a multi-part question. Are you happy with the cooperation of the local authorities? Do you feel that the questions and answers that young man has been through with them have been turned over to you appropriately, that maybe translation is needed, you want to investigate and ask your own questions and you're not getting that? Where does that part stand?
Well, it's my understanding that that people that were with her and witnesses that were there have been interviewed several times. And I believe on the several occasions there has been some inconsistencies with their very own stories. And that does bother me here, which really begs the question, what really happened there? And, and I do know that there was some speculation that she may have drowned. I think it's way too premature to make an assumption like that. There has been no sighting of her in any capacity here, so it's very important that we go through all this, that we do some detailed investigation. We are working closely with Dominican authorities. We do have our folks that are hand in hand with them down there, so we're trying to get the best information that we can, but we're not the lead on it. It's their country right now, and until we get something more concrete, it's really kind of it's a little difficult for us because we're working through somebody else.
Do you know if that young man who was last with her is an American citizen? Have you had a shot at interviewing him? Have the FBI had a shot at interviewing him? Do you have the proper transcripts from the interview that the locals did with him?
I would say that he was an American citizen, and I would say that as far as the communications go and the interviews go, I believe that there's interviews that are being done hand in hand down there. However, I'm not there, and I can't validate that, but that's my understanding based on the communications we've had with our counterparts down there. So it is a joint effort down there, and we are trying to get to the bottom of it. We're trying to get some consistency with the statements here, and if you give inconsistent statements, then it means that you're not telling the truth there. So what we got to do is get to the facts here and see what's going on, and it's a difficult situation. I mean, I really feel for the family here. This is a missing person out of our jurisdiction, out of Loudoun County. We treat every one of these cases very seriously, and this one extremely. It's an extraordinary case, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to get to the bottom of this, because we feel really bad for the family. It's a very, very difficult thing for the family to be going through, friends, neighbors, and everything else. So we want to try to do everything in our power to get to the bottom of it. And it's been challenging because it's good we have so many people working on it, but it's also difficult because that also creates confusion as well.
Agreed. Sheriff, I've got to have you back on the show because it's a developing story. Will you come back again?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So appreciate it. Sheriff Mike Chapman reporting for us tonight. Coming up, someone who knows exactly what the conditions were like on the beach where Sadiqa disappeared, because she was also right there. Same beach, same resort, same day. Were there really big waves and dangerous surf? We got the video to prove it. She's live with me next.
Now's the time. Ask your doctor about Skyrizi, the #1 dermatologist prescribed biologic in psoriasis. Learn how AbbVie could help you save.
It's been almost 5 days since anyone's seen a 20-year-old spring breaker from the University of Pittsburgh. Sadiqa Konanki left a hotel bar in Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic with a group of friends headed for the beach. Most of the friends were later seen leaving the beach, but Sadiqa stayed behind with a guy, and then the guy left without Sadiqa. My next guest was at the same resort on the same day. She says the waves were big and they were dangerous, and she has the video to prove it. Delani Sweeney joins me now live. Delani, the video that we were just showing, and we'll show it again, does show red flags that the conditions were very rough and that the swimming would have been very rough. Do you remember it being that way on that day that Sadiqa went missing?
Yeah, I remember the waves being a lot bigger than they normally were. Me and my friends were on the beach, and I remember telling them that I was not going to go into the ocean because I knew I could swim, but not that well enough to feel safe in the ocean. I know a couple friends that did go in, but they weren't in for a while, and there weren't as many people in the ocean as we normally would see.
So we know, from your account and from your video that the waves were rough, that the surf was rough. What about the danger of the beach itself? Did anybody at the resort or anyone in the DR ever say to you, be careful at night going down the beach. Don't go down this way or that way, or don't wander off our resort part of the beach? Or did you even notice lots of police or patrols on the beach? What was that like?
There was no communication from the resort at all of, this is our beach safety, to be safe. It was kind of just left up to your own discretion. I know we would go down and another group of people would go down to take beach pictures. And one night there was a security guard whistling at people to come in from the beach that were going in. But that was the only night that I had seen it. And we went practically almost every day down to the beach to take pictures. And that was the only night that I saw.
But interesting that there was someone out there, a guard, who was whistling at anybody going into the water, like, come out, it's nighttime, it's not safe in there. I do have one other question. You had been quite, vocal on your social media about the terrible conditions at this hotel. I'll just tick off a few here. Key cards weren't working. You couldn't get in and out of your rooms. The water was shut off. The power was shut off. The AC wasn't working. There was no Wi-Fi. The towels smelled like vomit. There was bottled water that had to be used for everything. The food was bad. The drinks were bad. Do you think that maybe Sadiqa and the other kids and others were maybe down on the beach more than they would have been otherwise because the conditions at the resort seemed to be so bad?
I think that 100%. I know people that got locked out of their rooms, and because of the power being out for hours, days on end, the customer service was not able to help them or, regenerate their cards to work in their room. So people were sleeping in other people's rooms. They were sleeping on the pool chairs. They were sleeping by the beach. They were staying out as long as they could because there's no AC in the rooms, and the room could get 80 degrees plus.
You have been so helpful, Delani. Thank you so much. And as we continue to look into these questions, I may call you again just to see if the accounts that we're hearing from down there match what you saw when you were there at the same time. Thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.